There's a specific kind of failure that has nothing to do with skill. You've trained for the moment. You know the material. You've done the work 100 times in practice, and then the stakes get real. The offer is on the table, the room goes quiet, the number on the screen starts moving the wrong way, and something inside you seizes. You don't act. You analyze. You run the scenario again and again and a third time, looking for the angle you must be missing. The clock keeps moving. And by the time your mind finally hands you an answer, the moment that needed you is already gone. Most people call this overthinking, and then they try to fix it by thinking harder about how to think less. It doesn't work. It never works. And the reason it never works is that you've fundamentally misunderstood what your mind is, what it was built for, and why it does exactly the opposite of what you need precisely when you need it most. Here's the uncomfortable truth that almost no one tells high performers. Your brain was not designed to make you effective under pressure. It was designed to keep a frightened animal alive long enough to reproduce. Composure, clarity, decisive action when everything is on the line, none of that was the goal. Survival was the goal. And the machinery that kept your ancestors breathing is the same machinery that freezes you in the boardroom, floods you at the negotiating table, and traps you in your own head at 3 in the morning. You are not broken. You are running ancient software in a situation it was never written for. Once you understand that, really understand it, you stop trying to silence your mind and start learning to work around its design. That's what this is about. Start with the hardware, because everything else follows from it. The human brain is not a general-purpose thinking device that happens to get nervous. It is a survival organ that happens to think. For roughly 2 million years, the thing that determined whether your genetic line continued was not the quality of your reasoning. It was the speed of your threat detection. The ancestor who paused on the savannah to carefully weigh whether the shape in the grass was a predator or a trick of the light got eaten. The one who flinched first, who flooded with adrenaline and ran before the analysis finished, lived to pass that twitchy, fast, fear-first wiring down to you. You are the descendant of the nervous ones. Every one of us is. Calm, deliberate, accurate thinking was a luxury the environment almost never rewarded because in a world of immediate physical danger, being right slowly is the same as being wrong. So the brain optimized for something else entirely. It optimized for fast pattern matching against threat, for a strong negativity, bias, that weights bad news far heavier than good, and for a stress response that hijacks the entire body the instant it senses risk. That system is breathtakingly good at what it was built to do. The problem is, what it was built to do has almost nothing to do with your actual life. Your threats are no longer physical. The predator is a quarterly target. The cliff edge is a difficult conversation. The rival tribe is a competitor's product launch. But your survival hardware cannot tell the difference. It reads a hostile email and a charging animal through the very same circuit. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure that acts as your threat alarm, does not distinguish between a risk to your body and a risk to your status, your income, or your self-image. It fires the same way. It floods you with the same cortisol and adrenaline. It narrows your vision, speeds your heart, and shoves blood and energy away from the slow, deliberate, recently evolved parts of your brain and toward the fast, ancient ones. This is the first thing you have to accept. When the pressure hits and you feel yourself getting tight, stupid, and reactive, that is not a personal weakness. That is a 2-million-year-old security system doing precisely the job it was designed for, protecting an animal that no longer exists from a world that no longer exists at the exact moment you need it to stand down. Now watch what that hardware actually does to you in the moment that counts. There is a part of your brain sitting just behind your forehead called the prefrontal cortex. It is the most recently evolved region you have, and it is the seat of everything that makes you effective under pressure: working memory, impulse control, long-term planning, the ability to hold several options in mind and choose deliberately between them. It is, in every real sense, the part of you that does the job. And it is the first thing the survival system shuts down. When your threat response fires hard enough, it does something neuroscientists describe as a functional disconnection. The fast, emotional, threat-driven circuitry effectively takes the prefrontal cortex offline. Blood flow shifts. Stress chemistry floods the system. The sophisticated executive that you spent your whole life training goes quiet, and control passes to the ancient machinery that knows only 3 moves: fight, flee, or freeze. This is why the failure feels so baffling from the inside. You are not less capable than you were yesterday. The capability is still there. It has simply been locked in a room you can't reach. You stand at the podium and the words you rehearsed perfectly an hour ago are gone, because the working memory that held them has been commandeered. You sit across from the person you needed to push back against, and you go silent and agreeable, because freeze is the oldest survival reflex of all. The animal that goes still hopes the predator loses interest. The traitor watches the position move against him and cannot make himself close it, because the part of the brain that executes a plan has been overridden by the part that just wants the threat to stop. None of this is a character flaw. It is a predictable, mechanical consequence of how the machine is wired. The Stoics noticed this pattern 2,000 years before anyone could image a brain. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And what he was describing, in the language he had, is exactly this: a threat system that responds to the picture in your head as if it were the thing itself. The body doesn't wait for the danger to be real. It reacts to the forecast. And here is the cruel part of the design. The more you care about the outcome, the louder the alarm. The system is calibrated to importance. A meeting that doesn't matter produces no hijack at all. You're loose, fluent, sharp. The meeting that decides everything produces the maximum flood. So the hardware fails you in direct proportion to how much the moment matters. It abandons you precisely, specifically, reliably, when the stakes are highest. That is not bad luck. That is the design working as intended. Most high performers never get hit by the obvious freeze. They're too capable for that. What gets them instead is the freeze wearing a costume, and the costume is overthinking. This is the trap that almost no one sees because it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like diligence. You're not panicking. You're being thorough. You're not avoiding the decision. You're gathering more information. You run one more analysis, build one more model, ask one more person, sleep on it one more night. It feels responsible. It feels like exactly what a serious person should do. But step back and look at the function rather than the feeling, and the disguise falls away. Overthinking is the threat system buying time. It is the freeze response, translated into the language of an intelligent person who would never accept simply going blank. The animal that cannot run or fight goes motionless and waits for the danger to pass. The executive who cannot tolerate that motionlessness fills it with thought. The rumination isn't solving the problem. It's a way of not acting while feeling like you're doing something about it. And the tell is simple. Real analysis converges. It narrows toward a decision. It reaches a point where more information stops changing the answer. Overthinking does the opposite. It diverges. Every loop opens 2 new questions. Every answer you reach gets reopened an hour later. You are not getting closer to clarity. You are circling the same fear from slightly different angles and mistaking the motion for progress. There's a reason this happens. The survival brain is built around a single principle: certainty equals safety. To an animal, an unresolved threat is an open wound. So the mind keeps worrying the problem the way a tongue keeps returning to a broken tooth, because closing the uncertainty feels like survival itself. But the decisions that actually define a career almost never offer certainty. They are bets made with incomplete information under time pressure. That is the entire nature of high-stakes work. So you've set up an impossible standoff. The survival brain demands certainty before it will release you to act, and the situation structurally cannot provide it. The result is a mind that spins forever, generating the sensation of work while producing nothing, exhausting you, and quietly running out the clock on the very window where action was still possible. Epictetus drew the line that cuts straight through this. Some things, he said, are within our power, and some are not. And the whole of wisdom is knowing which is which. Overthinking is what happens when you refuse that line. It is the mind trying to think its way to control over an outcome that was never inside your control to begin with. The other person's response, the market's move, the future itself. You cannot compute your way to certainty about things that are not yours to determine. You can only loop. And the loop, no matter how intelligent it sounds from the inside, is just the oldest freeze response in a more expensive suit. Here is where almost everyone makes the same mistake, and it's worth being precise about why it's a mistake. When a capable person realizes they overthink, their instinct is to attack the problem with more thinking. They read about decision frameworks. They build checklists for when to stop deliberating. They try to reason themselves out of the loop. And it fails every time for a reason that becomes obvious once you see it. You cannot use the hijacked system to fix the hijack. The thinking mind is the thing that's been captured. Asking it to free itself is like asking a man to lift the chair he's sitting in. The more he strains, the more firmly he stays put. When you try to outthink the spiral, all you're doing is feeding it, adding another layer of analysis to a system that is already drowning in analysis. The loop doesn't shrink, it grows, because you've just given it more material to chew on. The way out is not more thought. It is the deliberate interruption of thought and a return to something the survival brain actually respects: the body and the present moment. This is the part that sounds soft until you understand the mechanism. The threat hijack is not, at its root, a mental event. It is a physical one. The flood of stress chemistry, the spike in heart rate, the shallow breath, the tension in the chest. That is the actual fire. The racing thoughts are smoke. And you cannot put out a fire by arguing with the smoke, but the body has a back door and it runs through the breath. Your heart rate, your stress response, the whole alarm system. Most of it operates automatically, below conscious control. Breathing is the one piece of that automatic system you can also run manually. When you slow your exhale deliberately, make it longer than the inhale, and keep it slow. You send a direct physical signal up to the brain that the threat has passed. You are speaking to the survival system in the only language it trusts, which is not words but physiology. The thinking brain cannot talk the amygdala down. The breath can. This is why the people who perform under genuine pressure, the operators, the surgeons, the elite competitors, do not have less fear than you. They have a trained physical protocol for staying online when the fear hits. They breathe before the alarm fully takes hold. They have a deliberate routine that keeps the prefrontal cortex from going dark. They are not thinking their way to calm. They are using the body to keep the thinking machine available in the first place. Marcus Aurelius, writing notes to himself that he never meant for anyone to read, kept returning to one instruction: come back to the present, again and again. He understood that the mind's torment lived almost entirely in the rehearsed future and the replayed past, and that the present moment, the thing actually in front of you, is almost always manageable. The reframe is not to think better thoughts. It is to step out of the thought stream entirely and put your attention on what is real and immediate: the breath, the body, the next single concrete action you can actually take. That is not retreat. That is how you get your mind back. Understanding the design is not the same as beating it, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. You don't get to delete 2 million years of wiring by reading about it once. The amygdala will still fire. The flood will still come. What changes is what you do in the seconds after it starts, and that response is not something you'll improvise in the moment, because in the moment, the part of you that improvises is exactly what goes offline. It has to be built in advance, built like a reflex, trained until it runs on its own. This is why pressure cannot be handled through willpower. Willpower is a function of the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is the first casualty of the hijack. The thing you're counting on to save you is the thing that disappears. So you don't rely on deciding well under pressure. You build a protocol that fires before deciding is required. The first piece is the physical reset, a breathing pattern you've practiced so many times in calm conditions that it deploys automatically when the alarm sounds. Long, slow exhale. Done not once, but as a trained default, so that the body knows the route before the fire starts. The second piece is narrowing to the controllable. When the flood hits, the mind throws the entire catastrophe at you at once. Every consequence, every observer, every version of how it goes wrong. The override is to deliberately collapse that down to a single question. What is the one action actually in front of me right now? Not the outcome, not what it means, the next concrete move. This is the discipline of separating what is yours from what is not, applied in real time, under load. The third piece is exposure, and there is no way around it. The survival system learns one thing from one teacher: repeated experience. You cannot convince it that a high-stakes moment is safe by reasoning. You can only teach it by walking into pressure, surviving it, and letting the system slowly recalibrate what counts as a threat. This is what training under stress actually does. The fighter spars so the chaos of a real fight stops registering as an emergency. The performer rehearses under conditions worse than the real thing, so the real thing feels manageable. Every time you stay in the moment instead of fleeing into the spiral, you are filing evidence with the survival brain that you handled it, and it is paying attention. The wiring is ancient, but it is not fixed. It updates with proof. The goal was never to become someone who feels no pressure. That person doesn't exist, and if he did, he'd be useless. The pressure response, properly harnessed, is the sharpening. The goal is to stay online while it runs, to keep the lights on in the executive room while the alarm blares in the basement. That is a trainable skill, and almost nobody trains it, because almost everybody is still trying to win the fight by thinking harder. So return to the moment you started with: the freeze, the seizure, the mind spinning at the exact second you needed it to be still. You used to read that as evidence that something was wrong with you. Now you know what it actually is. It is a survival machine, extraordinary at its real job, doing that job in a world it was never built for. It is not your enemy, and it is not broken. It is simply old and loyal to a danger that no longer exists. You will not fix it by hating it, and you will not out-argue it, because the part of you that argues is the part it switches off first. What you can do is stop demanding that it be something it isn't. Stop asking the survival brain to deliver certainty it was never designed to provide. Stop trying to think your way out of a state that thinking created. The overthinking was never the disease. It was a symptom, the freeze response dressed up in the language of diligence, the mind looping because looping felt safer than acting without a guarantee no real decision ever offers. The way out is quieter and harder than another framework. It is the breath that keeps the executive online. It is the narrowing to the one action that is actually yours. It is the repeated, deliberate choice to step out of the thought stream and back into the thing in front of you. The present moment, where the problem is almost always smaller than the forecast of it. And it is the slow, unglamorous work of teaching an ancient system, through experience and not argument, that you can handle what comes. You were never supposed to think this much. The machine in your skull was tuned for a sprint away from a predator, not for the sustained, ambiguous, high-stakes pressure of a modern life. Knowing that doesn't make the pressure disappear, but it changes the fight. You stop trying to silence the alarm and start learning to work while it rings. That is the whole of it. Not a quieter mind. A mind you can still use when it gets loud.